In a neighborhood obsessed with rules, the HOA president kept accidentally crashing into one man's mailbox until he built a mailbox so tough it turned the tables. What happened next exposed secrets no one saw coming. Crestview Estates was the kind of neighborhood where every blade of grass was trimmed to perfection, every mailbox stood straight and proud, and every rule was followed to the letter. Unless, of course, you were the HOA president. Blythe Carrington ruled this quiet enclave like a queen with an iron fist hidden beneath a velvet glove. She was known for enforcing bylaws with surgical precision, making sure no one dared to paint their front door the wrong shade or leave a garden gnome out of place. But when it came to her own actions, well, that was a different story. The streets of Crestview were narrow, winding through rows of identical houses with manicured lawns and white picket fences. Blythe's luxury SUV, a sleek, black machine that gleamed in the sun, was often seen cruising these roads, but not without incident. For months, Vaughan Royston, a quiet structural engineer who lived on Maplewood Lane, had watched with growing irritation as Blythe's SUV repeatedly clipped his mailbox. Not just a gentle tap, but a full-on sideswipe that left the post leaning like a sailor who'd had one too many drinks. Each time, Blythe would step out with that same tight-lipped smile, and offer the exact same excuse. Oops, these roads are just so narrow, aren't they? Her voice was sweet, but there was a sharp edge beneath it, like she was daring Vaughan to say something. But Vaughan wasn't one for confrontation. He was a man who preferred facts over feelings, calculations over chaos. Still, after the third time, his patience was wearing thin. Vaughan's mailbox wasn't just a mailbox. It was a symbol of his quiet resistance. Unlike the other neighbors who had simple wooden or plastic boxes, his was a modest but sturdy design, chosen carefully to withstand the occasional bump from delivery trucks or careless drivers. But Blythe's repeated accidents were different. They felt intentional, like a test of boundaries that Vaughan wasn't willing to ignore any longer. It wasn't just about the mailbox. It was about respect, about fairness. Blythe enforced rules on everyone else, but seemed to think she was above them. Vaughan had seen her send letters to neighbors for the smallest infractions, an untidy hedge here, a missing house number there. But when it came to her own mistakes, she waved them off with a shrug. One afternoon, Vaughan stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching Blythe's SUV turn the corner. As usual, she took the curve too sharply, scraping the front bumper against his mailbox. The familiar crunch echoed through the quiet street. Blythe stepped out, her mascara smudged from the heat, sunglasses slightly askew. She gave Vaughan that same smile, but this time, Vaughan didn't return it. Maybe the road's not the problem, Vaughan said. Voice calm but firm. Blythe's eyes narrowed. Careful, Vaughan. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. He just nodded, already planning his next move. If Blythe wanted a game, he was ready to play, but on his terms. The neighborhood watched, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled amusement. Blythe's reputation as the queen of selective enforcement was well known, but Vaughan's silent defiance was starting to shift the balance. It was a quiet battle, fought not with words or meetings, but with steel and concrete. But Blythe wasn't just going to let this slide. She had power, influence, and a knack for making things happen behind the scenes. Vaughan knew that, yet he also knew that sometimes standing up to someone like Blythe meant more than just fixing a mailbox. It meant challenging the very system she'd built. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, Vaughan made a decision. If Blythe wanted to keep playing rough, he would respond in kind, but with a twist she wouldn't see coming. But this was only the beginning of a showdown that would shake Crestview Estates to its core. Vaughan Royston wasn't a man of impulse. He was an engineer, trained to analyze, calculate, and build solutions with precision. So, when Blythe Carrington's SUV clipped his mailbox for the fourth time, his response wasn't anger or shouting. It was a decision. A decision to apply his professional skills to solve a deeply personal problem. As he stood on his porch that afternoon, watching Blythe drive away with a dismissive wave, Vaughan started formulating a plan. It wouldn't be a quick fix or a petty act of revenge. It would be a calculated move that addressed the root of the issue. 12. The existing mailbox was flimsy, easily replaced with something sturdier. But Vaughan had something much more robust in mind. He needed a mailbox that could withstand Blythe's accidents without budging an inch. He envisioned a structure that was both functional and a statement, a silent, unyielding testament to his resolve. That evening, after dinner, Vaughan retreated to his garage, a space he'd converted into a workshop. Tools hung neatly on the walls, organized with the same precision he applied to his engineering projects. Blueprints and sketches covered his workbench, each one a testament to his meticulous nature. He pulled out his notebook and began to sketch designs. He considered various materials: steel, reinforced concrete, even a combination of both. The key was to create a structure that appeared ordinary on the outside, but was virtually indestructible on the inside. He spent hours poring over stress calculations, load-bearing capacities, and structural integrity. It wasn't just about building a mailbox, it was about engineering a fortress. Vaughan knew that Blythe wouldn't back down easily. She was used to getting her way, and he suspected she'd see his new mailbox as a direct challenge to her authority. That's why his plan had to be flawless. He needed to ensure that everything was up to code, that there were no grounds for her to complain or take legal action. He researched local regulations, HOA guidelines, and even consulted with a lawyer friend to cover all his bases. Over the next few days, Vaughan dedicated his evenings and weekends to the project. He ordered materials from a local supplier, carefully selecting each component for its strength and durability. Steel beams, concrete mix, and a heavy-duty mailbox were delivered to his house, much to the curiosity of his neighbors. Some stopped by to ask what he was up to, but Vaughan remained tight-lipped, only offering a cryptic smile and a vague explanation about improving the property. He worked methodically, mixing concrete, welding steel, and assembling the structure piece by piece. The garage filled with the sounds of power tools and the smell of metal. Vaughan found a sense of satisfaction in the work, a feeling of control in a situation that had previously felt frustrating and unfair. He was taking matters into his own hands, quite literally building a solution to his problem. As the structure began to take shape, Vaughan couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. He knew that Blythe would eventually test his creation, and he was ready. He imagined her surprise when her SUV collided with the unyielding mailbox, the satisfying crunch of metal against metal. It wasn't about revenge, it was about sending a message that said, enough is enough. But Vaughan also knew that this was more than just a personal vendetta. It was about standing up to bullies, about challenging abuse of power, and about defending his property and his peace of mind. He was setting an example for his neighbors, showing them that it was possible to resist even the most entrenched authority. He also understood that his actions would have consequences. Blythe wouldn't take this lying down, and he was prepared for whatever she might throw his way. He had done his research, covered his bases, and built a mailbox that was both a physical and symbolic barrier against her reckless behavior. However, the real test was yet to come, and Vaughan knew that Blythe's reaction would determine the next chapter in this escalating neighborhood drama. The weekend arrived, and Vaughan was ready. His plan was no longer just a sketch on paper or a blueprint in his mind. It was a tangible, solid structure sitting proudly at the edge of his property. The reinforced mailbox was unlike anything Crestview Estates had seen before. From a distance, it looked like any other mailbox. A simple, unassuming box with a cheerful red flag standing at the perfect height and angle. But up close, it was a fortress. Vaughan had anchored the mailbox to a 3-foot concrete foundation, poured and cured with precision. Inside, a steel frame welded into a solid block gave the mailbox its unbreakable core. The exterior was painted a classic white, matching the neat fence and manicured lawns around it. It was a perfect disguise for something so tough. Vaughan smiled to himself, knowing that Blythe's usual accident would no longer be a simple tap or a nudge. That morning, Vaughan stood back and admired his work. The sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and the quiet neighborhood buzzed with the usual sounds of children playing and sprinklers hissing. Neighbors glanced curiously at the new mailbox, whispering among themselves. Some admired the craftsmanship. Others wondered if Vaughan was making a statement. But Vaughan paid them no mind. He was focused on what mattered most, standing his ground. Later that day, Blythe Carrington drove past Vaughan's house, her black SUV gliding down the narrow street. She took the familiar curve near Vaughan's property, just as she always did. But this time, the outcome was different. Instead of the mailbox bending or leaning, the front end of her SUV crumpled like a soda can against the reinforced steel. The airbags deployed with a deafening whomp, filling the car with a sudden burst of white powder. Blythe sat stunned for a moment, mascara smudged and sunglasses crooked. She opened the door and stepped out, wobbling slightly as she surveyed the damage. Vaughan, watching from his porch, leaned against the railing with his arms crossed. "Huh," he muttered. "Guess the road wasn't the problem after all." Neighbors rushed out of their homes, drawn by the noise and commotion. Some whispered about the irony of the situation. Others exchanged knowing looks. Blythe, usually so composed and commanding, was now visibly shaken. She tried to regain her composure, brushing dirt from her designer jacket and adjusting her sunglasses. Vaughan approached her calmly, his voice steady but firm. "Looks like your usual route just got a little less forgiving." Blythe's eyes flashed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "You think this is funny, Vaughan?" "No," Vaughan replied. "I think it's about time someone stopped letting accidents slide." The tension between them was palpable. Blythe's reputation as the queen of selective enforcement suddenly seemed fragile, exposed by a mailbox that refused to back down. Vaughan's quiet defiance had shifted the balance, and the neighborhood was watching. But Blythe wasn't one to surrender easily. She straightened her posture and said, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Vaughan smiled, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the beginning." But neither of them realized how far this battle would go, or how much it would change Crestview Estates forever. The sound of the collision echoed through Crestview Estates, shattering the usual afternoon calm. Car alarms blared, and neighbors poured out of their homes, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Blythe Carrington, the epitome of suburban perfection, stood beside her crumpled SUV, her facade of composure visibly cracked. The sight was almost surreal, the queen of the HOA dethroned by a mailbox. Vaughan Royston watched from his porch, a subtle satisfaction in his eyes. He had anticipated this moment, planned for it, and now it had arrived. The reinforced mailbox stood firm, unyielding against the impact. It was a clear, visual statement that resonated through the neighborhood. The initial shock on Blythe's face quickly turned to anger. She glared at Vaughan, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and embarrassment. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with indignation. "This isn't over, Vaughan." Vaughan remained calm, his expression unreadable. "It is if you stop hitting my mailbox, Blythe," the neighbors began to murmur among themselves. Some chuckled, others gasped. The confrontation was like a public spectacle, a real-life drama unfolding in the middle of their perfectly manicured community. Among the onlookers was Martha Jenkins, a retiree who lived across the street from Vaughan. She had always found Blythe's strict enforcement of the HOA rules to be excessive, and often whispered about the HOA president's hypocrisy with her friends over afternoon tea. Martha couldn't help but feel a sense of glee at seeing Blythe in such a predicament. "Well, I must say, Blythe, that's quite the dent," Martha quipped, unable to suppress a smile. Blythe shot Martha a venomous look before turning back to Vaughan. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You knew I'd hit it." "I built a sturdy mailbox," Vaughan responded evenly. "If you hadn't been driving so carelessly, this wouldn't have happened." "Carelessly?" Blythe scoffed. "These roads are too narrow. Everyone knows that." "Then maybe you should drive slower," Vaughan suggested. "Or perhaps consider the fact that you're the only one having these accidents." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Blythe realized she was losing control of the situation. She needed to regain her authority, to reassert her dominance. She pulled out her phone and began to dial, her expression hardening. "I'm calling the police," she announced. "I'm pressing charges for property damage." Vaughan simply shrugged. "Go ahead. I've done nothing wrong. My mailbox is on my property and it meets all the regulations. Blythe's phone connected, and she began to explain the situation to the dispatcher, exaggerating the details and portraying herself as the victim. As she spoke, Vaughan observed the gathering crowd, noticing the range of reactions. Some were clearly on Blythe's side, loyal to the HOA and its strict rules. Others seemed sympathetic to Vaughan, recognizing the injustice of Blythe's repeated accidents. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, the atmosphere in Crestview Estates grew even more charged. The confrontation between Vaughan and Blythe had become a symbol of the underlying tensions within the community, a battle between order and freedom, between conformity and individuality. But as the police arrived, neither Vaughan nor Blythe knew that this incident would trigger a series of events that would expose the deep-seated issues within Crestview Estates. The arrival of the police cars shattered the surreal tableau that had formed in Crestview Estates. Two officers stepped out, their expressions neutral as they assessed the scene. The crumpled front end of Blythe's SUV stood in stark contrast to Vaughan's unscathed mailbox, a silent testament to the force of the collision. Officer Miller, a young, clean-cut officer, approached Blythe first. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened here?" Blythe, seizing the opportunity to play the victim, launched into her version of the story, emphasizing the narrowness of the road and portraying Vaughan's mailbox as a dangerous obstruction. She spoke with practiced sincerity, her voice trembling slightly to convey her distress. Officer Miller listened attentively, nodding occasionally as he took notes. But Vaughan knew that Blythe was twisting the truth, omitting her history of repeated accidents and exaggerating the damage to her vehicle. When Blythe finished, Officer Miller turned to Vaughan. "Sir, do you have anything to add?" Vaughan stepped forward, his demeanor calm and respectful. "Officer, this is not the first time Ms. Carrington has hit my mailbox. In fact, it's the fourth time in as many months. Each time she claims it was an accident due to the narrowness of the road." He paused, then gestured towards his mailbox. "I built a sturdier mailbox to prevent further damage to my property. If Ms. Carrington had been driving responsibly, this incident would not have occurred." Officer Miller examined the mailbox closely, running his hand along its smooth white exterior. He glanced at Officer Jones, his older, more experienced partner, who had been quietly observing the scene. Officer Jones approached Blythe, his expression stern. "Ms. Carrington, is it true that you've hit this mailbox multiple times before?" Blythe hesitated for a moment, her composure faltering. "Well, yes, but it was always a minor thing. Just a little bump." "A little bump that required you to call the police and claim property damage?" Officer Jones raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. The crowd's murmurs grew louder again, and several neighbors began to share their accounts of Blythe's driving habits. Martha Jenkins spoke up, her voice clear and unwavering. "Officer, I've seen Ms. Carrington speed around these corners countless times. She never slows down." Other neighbors chimed in, corroborating Martha's statement. Blythe's carefully constructed image of suburban perfection was crumbling before her eyes. Officer Miller and Officer Jones exchanged glances, realizing that this was more than a simple traffic accident. It was a neighborhood dispute with deep-seated issues. Officer Jones turned back to Blythe, his voice firm. "Ms. Carrington, I'm not going to issue a citation for property damage at this time. However, I am advising you to drive more carefully in the future. Repeated accidents suggest a pattern of reckless behavior." Blythe's face flushed with anger and humiliation. She glared at Vaughan, her eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over, Vaughan," she hissed. Vaughan met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I hope it is, Blythe. But if you continue to endanger my property, I will take further action." The police officers wrapped up their investigation, advising both parties to resolve their dispute peacefully. As they drove away, the neighbors began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with speculation and gossip. The confrontation had exposed the fault lines within Crestview Estates, revealing the simmering tensions beneath its pristine surface. Blythe's authority had been challenged, and Vaughan had emerged as an unlikely hero, a symbol of resistance against the queen of selective enforcement. But Blythe was not one to accept defeat. She would use all the resources at her disposal to regain control, setting in motion a series of events that would plunge Crestview Estates into chaos. Word spread quickly through Crestview Estates. The story of Blythe Carrington's crash into Vaughan Royston's reinforced mailbox became the talk of the neighborhood, whispered in front yards, at weekend barbecues, and during evening walks. The pristine streets, usually filled with polite nods and quiet greetings, buzzed with a new energy, curiosity, gossip, and a growing sense of division. Some neighbors admired Vaughan's quiet stand. People like Martha Jenkins, who had long felt the sting of Blythe's strict and often unfair rule enforcement, saw this as a victory. Finally, someone stood up to her, Martha said to a small group gathered on her porch. It's about time. Others, however, remained loyal to Blythe. They respected her dedication to keeping Crestview Estates orderly and feared what might happen if her authority was undermined. Blythe's just doing her job, argued Harold Simmons, a retired school principal. We all have to follow the rules, and accidents happen. It's unfortunate, but Vaughan's mailbox was in the way. The split in opinion created an undercurrent of tension. Vaughan noticed it during his morning walks and while watering his garden. Some neighbors offered friendly smiles and nods of support. Others avoided eye contact or whispered behind his back. The neighborhood, once united by shared expectations and quiet routines, was now fractured. The HOA board, usually a background presence, suddenly became active. Blythe called an emergency meeting at the community center, inviting all residents to discuss the incident and the future of neighborhood safety. Flyers appeared on doorsteps, and the buzz of anticipation filled the air. At the meeting, Blythe took center stage, her voice steady but edged with determination. This incident has raised important questions about safety and respect in our community, she began. We must ensure that our roads are safe for everyone and that property damage is minimized. Vaughan listened from the back of the room, arms crossed. When it was his turn to speak, he stood calmly and addressed the crowd. I built the mailbox to protect my property after repeated accidents. This isn't about defiance, it's about fairness. We all deserve to live in a neighborhood where rules apply equally. The room was divided. Some applauded Vaughan's words, others murmured in disagreement. Blythe's supporters whispered about the need for stricter enforcement, while Vaughan's allies called for transparency and accountability. After the meeting, the community's conversations shifted. Social media groups buzzed with debates, and neighbors began to question the fairness of the HOA's selective enforcement. Vaughan's mailbox had become more than a physical barrier. It was a symbol of resistance and a catalyst for change. But Blythe was not one to back down quietly. She began to use her position to scrutinize Vaughan's property, sending letters about minor violations and calling for inspections. Vaughan, prepared for this, responded with calm professionalism, ensuring everything was in order and documenting every interaction. The neighborhood watched this growing conflict with a mix of fascination and concern. Some feared it would escalate beyond control. Others hoped it would lead to a more just and respectful community. But as tensions simmered and alliances formed, Crestview Estates was on the brink of a transformation that no one could have predicted. Blythe Carrington was not the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. Crestview Estates was her kingdom, and every challenge to her authority felt like a personal affront. After the HOA meeting, where Vaughan had publicly questioned her leadership, Blythe retreated to her office, a room filled with perfectly organized files, binders labeled with HOA rules, and a large mahogany desk that had seen countless neighborhood disputes. Her mind raced with plans. If Vaughan wanted a battle, she would give him one, but on her terms. She began by reviewing every possible bylaw, every regulation she could use to put pressure on Vaughan. Minor infractions, no matter how trivial, would become ammunition in her fight to regain control. Within days, Vaughan received a formal letter from the HOA, citing a violation of landscaping guidelines. The letter was precise, pointing out that a small patch of his lawn didn't meet the exact height requirements specified in the HOA handbook. It was the kind of nitpicking that Blythe excelled at, designed to wear down her opponents. Vaughan read the letter carefully, then responded with a polite but firm letter of his own, attaching photos showing his lawn was well within acceptable limits. He requested clarification and reminded the HOA that any enforcement must be consistent and fair. But Blythe's campaign didn't stop there. She organized surprise inspections, sending HOA representatives to Vaughan's property to scrutinize every detail. Neighbors noticed the increased activity around Vaughan's house, and whispers about the escalating feud spread like wildfire. One afternoon, as Vaughan was working in his garage, a knock came at the door. It was Linda, a member of the HOA board and one of Blythe's closest allies. "We're here to conduct a routine inspection," Linda said, clipboard in hand. "Just making sure everything complies with the community standards." Vaughan nodded, stepping aside to let them in. He answered their questions calmly, showing them around and pointing out the reinforced mailbox with a hint of pride. Linda's smile was tight. "Very impressive," she said, but Vaughan could tell she was searching for any excuse to report a violation. Despite the pressure, Vaughan remained composed. He documented every interaction, keeping records of letters, inspections, and conversations. He knew that Blythe's tactics were about intimidation, and he refused to be bullied. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was divided. Some admired Vaughan's resilience, while others worried that the conflict was tearing the community apart. Social gatherings became tense, with conversations often circling back to the ongoing dispute. Blythe, however, was undeterred. She called another HOA meeting, this time focusing on community standards and enforcement. Her speech was polished, emphasizing the importance of rules and the need for everyone to comply. But beneath the surface, it was clear she was targeting Vaughan. When Vaughan spoke again, he addressed the crowd with quiet conviction. "Rules are important, but they must be applied fairly. Selective enforcement breeds resentment and division. We need a community where everyone is treated equally." His words struck a chord with many, but Blythe's supporters remained loyal, defending her leadership and warning against rebellion. The battle lines were drawn. Crestview Estates was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a battleground for fairness, respect, and power. But as Blythe escalated her campaign, Vaughan prepared for the next move, knowing that standing up for what's right sometimes means facing the storm head-on. Vaughan Royston had never been one to back down from a challenge, especially when it came to fairness and integrity. The mounting pressure from Blythe Carrington and her HOA allies was intense, but Vaughan remained steady. He understood that this wasn't just about a mailbox or a dented SUV, it was about standing up against selective enforcement and the misuse of power. One evening, after a long day at work, Vaughan sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the stack of letters and notices he had received from the HOA. Each one was more nitpicky than the last, but Vaughan had anticipated this. He had spent hours documenting every detail of his property, ensuring that he complied with every rule. He wasn't about to let Blythe's tactics intimidate him. The next morning, Vaughan attended the monthly HOA meeting, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension in the room. Blythe was already there, seated at the head of the table, her expression icy. The room was packed with neighbors, some curious, others clearly divided in their loyalties. When it was his turn to speak, Vaughan stood up and addressed the group. "I want to talk about fairness and accountability," he began. "We all live here because we value this community. But that means rules should apply equally to everyone, not just some." He paused, looking around the room. Selective enforcement creates resentment and division. It's not about breaking rules, it's about how those rules are applied. I've done my best to comply with every guideline, yet I've been targeted repeatedly. That's not justice. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Blythe's lips pressed into a thin line, but Vaughan wasn't finished. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he continued. "I want us to work together to make Crestview Estates a place where respect and fairness are the foundation. If we can't do that, then what's the point of all these rules?" The room erupted into murmurs and whispers. Some applauded quietly, others exchanged skeptical glances. Blythe cleared her throat and responded. "Rules are rules, Vaughan. We all agreed to them when we moved here. It's about maintaining order and property values." Vaughan nodded. "I agree, but maintaining order means enforcing rules consistently. Otherwise, it's just power for power's sake." The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Vaughan's words had made an impact. The community was beginning to question the status quo, and Blythe's grip on authority was loosening. Outside the meeting hall, neighbors approached Vaughan with words of encouragement. Martha Jenkins smiled warmly. "You're doing the right thing, Vaughan." Someone had to stand up, but Vaughan also felt the weight of the conflict. He knew this was far from over, and that Blythe would continue to push back. Still, he was ready. His stand was about more than just his mailbox. It was about fairness, respect, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. But as Vaughan prepared for the next chapter, Crestview Estates braced for a showdown that would test the limits of community, power, and integrity. The tension in Crestview Estates had reached a boiling point. The ongoing feud between Vaughan and Blythe had divided the community, exposed the flaws in its rigid structure, and forced neighbors to confront uncomfortable truths about power and fairness. As the conflict dragged on, even Blythe began to feel the strain. The constant scrutiny, the divided opinions, and the growing unrest were taking a toll. One morning, Vaughan received an unexpected phone call. It was Blythe. Her voice was subdued, lacking the usual sharp edge. "Vaughan," she said, "can we talk?" Vaughan hesitated for a moment, then agreed. They met at a neutral location, the local coffee shop, a place where neighbors often gathered to chat and catch up. Blythe arrived first, her usual impeccable attire slightly rumpled, her eyes showing signs of sleeplessness. When Vaughan arrived, he sat down across from her, his expression calm but cautious. "What did you want to talk about, Blythe?" Blythe sighed, stirring her coffee. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. "This whole thing, it's gotten out of hand. The community is divided, and I'm not sure it's worth it anymore." Vaughan listened quietly, surprised by her change of tone. "What changed your mind?" Blythe paused, looking out the window. "I realized that I was so focused on maintaining control that I lost sight of what really matters. The well-being of our community. Rules are important, but they shouldn't come at the cost of respect and fairness." Vaughan nodded slowly. "I agree. It's not about abolishing the rules. It's about applying them fairly." "Exactly," Blythe said. "And I haven't been doing that. I've been selective, using my position to target those who disagree with me. That was wrong." She looked at Vaughan, her eyes sincere. "I want to make things right. I want to work with you to create a community where everyone feels valued and respected." Vaughan considered her words carefully. He had been prepared for a continued battle, but Blythe's unexpected change of heart offered a different path, a path toward reconciliation and healing. "I'm willing to work with you," Vaughan said. "But it has to be a genuine effort. We need to rebuild trust and ensure that everyone has a voice." Blythe nodded, a hint of her old determination returning. "I'm committed to that. I'll start by stepping down as president of the HOA. It's time for new leadership, someone who can bring us together." And with that, the long and bitter feud between Vaughan and Blythe began to dissipate. They worked together to implement reforms in the HOA, ensuring that rules were applied fairly and that all residents had an equal opportunity to participate. Crestview Estates slowly began to heal, its residents learning the importance of communication, respect, and standing up for what's right. The reinforced mailbox remained a symbol of resistance and resilience, a reminder that even the smallest act of defiance can spark meaningful change. But as Crestview Estates moved forward, the lessons learned would resonate far beyond its neatly manicured lawns and quiet streets. The story of Crestview Estates didn't end with a crash or a confrontation, it ended with a lesson. Vaughan Royston's quiet determination and Blythe Carrington's eventual willingness to change showed that fairness and respect are the foundations of any community. It's easy to get caught up in rules and authority, but when those rules are applied unevenly, they lose their meaning, and so does the trust between neighbors. Vaughan's reinforced mailbox wasn't just a piece of steel and concrete. It was a symbol that standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's about being prepared, thoughtful, and consistent. It's about making sure your voice is heard, even if it's through something as simple as a mailbox. Blythe's journey was just as important. She learned that leadership isn't about control or power. It's about fairness, empathy, and listening to the people you serve. Her decision to step down and work toward a more inclusive community showed that change is possible, even for those who seem set in their ways. For viewers watching this story, The takeaway is clear. Don't let unfairness slide, but also don't let conflict consume you. Stand up with integrity, seek understanding, and be willing to find common ground. Communities thrive when every member feels respected and heard. If you've ever faced a situation where someone in power was unfair, or where rules seemed to apply only to certain people, remember Vaughan's example. You don't have to fight with anger or bitterness. You can build your own reinforced mailbox, your own way of standing firm with quiet strength. And if you're in a position of authority, remember Blythe's lesson. Leadership means fairness and accountability, not selective enforcement. Your role is to serve your community, not to control it. So, what can you do today? Look around your own community. Are there rules or systems that feel unfair? Are there voices being ignored? Take a step, small or big, to speak up, to listen, and to act with fairness. Change starts with one person willing to stand up and do what's right. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Let's build communities where everyone belongs and everyone matters. Because sometimes the strongest walls are built not to keep others out, but to protect what's rightfully ours.